Welcome everybody to It's a Smalls World. I'm joined by my lovely co-host Blakely. How you doing, Blakely?
I'm good.
And today we have a special guest. We have here Carl Rosen, the General President of the United Electrical Radio and Machine Workers of America. He's been a member of the union since 1984 and was elected president in 2019. Wow, that's a very long time. How you doing, Carl?
I'm doing well. It in retrospect, it is a long time, but it seems like it just happened.
So tell us about yourself. Tell us, like, how did you get involved? How, where did your background come from before the union?
Sure. I grew up in a very pro-union, pro-community organizing, basically pro-organizing working people to fight for themselves, family. Both of my parents were involved in labor and community organizing. And I went to work after college in a few different jobs as a maintenance electrician, and eventually spent 10 years at a UE factory in Chicago. It was a metal stamping plant, and served in a variety of local offices from steward on up through local president, and got involved at the district level, and eventually got elected as district president, which was a full-time position with the union, and then regional president when we merged our districts into regions, and then a couple of years ago, national president. And I've kicked around a lot of fights in between now and then.
Nice. That sounds amazing. So talking about those fights, I want to know, I'm curious, why did your union decide to stay independent?
Well, I mean, you have to look back at the history. We were a founding union of the CIO, back when the CIO was a militant, fighting, democratic organization intending to, get the entire working class into movement, based in, community-based unionism, very organic, tied into the whole working class. During the McCarthy era, labor unions had a choice to make, that they could knuckle under to cutting a deal with the corporate world that we'd get a little bit in the way of pay increases and benefits for our members, and leave out the rest of the working class, and they wouldn't mess with us too much, or we'd continue to stand up independently on behalf of the whole working class, not only in the U.S. but internationally too, and practice true international solidarity. We chose to go the route of standing up for the working class. So did 10 other unions. Of those 11 unions that left the CIO at that time, holy war was declared on all of us, and 9 were destroyed over the next several years. 2 survived, UE and the West Coast Longshore. We haven't seen the changes in the what then became the AFL-CIO since then sufficient that we would think it makes sense for us to go back in. We think that there are a lot of principal differences in how we go about doing our work. Still, we work with many AFL-CIO unions. We believe in labor solidarity. We're at everybody else's strikes and picket lines and everything else. But in terms of being independent, we've remained that way. We're also independent of the Democratic Party. Unlike a lot of other unions who basically have gotten so close to the Democratic Party that the Democratic Party sometimes seems to determine their policy rather than the other way around. It's not to say that we want to have the Republicans in power, or far from it. But and we also have supported Democratic candidates, and certainly, for example, Bernie Sanders, who we supported his campaign for president, even in the Democratic primary. That was the first time in our entire history that we supported a presidential candidate in the Democratic primary in this country. But we haven't had too many other candidates like Bernie Sanders up to now, and what he was running on and what he stood for.
Right, that's amazing. That is the reason why I asked that question is because I'm in that same type of situation here in Staten Island. I don't know if you heard about our efforts here. We're trying to unionize Amazon right now. And have you seen the news about what the Teamsters are trying to do nationwide? I wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, we've heard their announcement. I don't think anybody knows what that actually looks like. It's a lot of things are a lot easier said than done. we certainly are a believer that union organizing has to take place from the bottom up. That's one of the other reasons UE is state independent. We started out as a collection of independently organized local unions in different factories in the electrical and radio manufacturing industry who united in order to help organize the industry. But it was from the bottom up rather than the top down, as opposed to, say, one contrast we always talk about is the steel workers. The way they got unionized is the mine workers decided that the steel industry needed to be organized, and they were right. But because so much of their product went into the steel industry, and they formed the Steel Workers Organizing Committee and funded it and ran it from the top. So you basically had the national union before you had the locals. UE was founded the other way around. On the other hand, our locals banded together, these independent locals banded together to organize the rest of the industry because they knew they didn't have enough power on their own to take on these mega corporations. And I think, you recognize the same with Amazon. You're not going to beat Amazon in one location only. You're going to have power spread across a good range of places, key nodes, et cetera. In order to win fully what's needed. So it's it's not an easy task, but it's a task that's in front of people.
Right. I agree with you 100%. Roughly how many members are a part of UE?
So we say that we represent 35,000 working people. That number is less than exact, but that's the number that we say.
Nice, 35,000 people. That's amazing. And
well, it's a shell of what we were at the time of the onset of the McCarthy era. We were the third largest union in the country. We had over 600,000 members. But when you have the corporate world, the government, the other unions, and major religious institutions all decide to unite to try to take you down because of how powerful you are and what you stand for and their fear of what it meant for the economic powers that be, you get reduced. And then rounds of plant closings after that as the whole electrical industry left the country.
It sounds about right. And for yourself being the president, do you see any change in that going forward? Like, how do you feel like the union will develop and grow over time, even after, your time?
Well, we're making right now a huge commitment to organizing. We see workers in motion in lots of places. The pandemic has further contributed to that, but frankly, the last 13 years since the 2008 Great Recession has basically changed the whole younger generation, and even before that, the 2000 recession coming out of that. There's a generation of younger folks who realize that the system's not working for them, and they've got to take power into their own hands if they're going to have the kind of life that they'd like to have. And so you're probably familiar, I believe, with EWOC, the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee that we've formed jointly with the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. That's sparking a lot of organizing. But we also have some other major organizing campaigns underway. We're in the process of greatly expanding the number of staff we have working on organizing. And we're very hopeful that we're going to be expanding our numbers by many thousands in the next very few years. And we're also, absolutely committed to being engaged everywhere we can be in the greater societal struggles. So we've been involved just over the last year with Labor for Black Lives, which kicked off an online petition drive last summer, with Labor Action to Defend Democracy, which over the course of the fall and winter was preparing unions to stand up and fight back if necessary and join with the rest of civil society if Trump tried to pull off a coup. And we needed to pull on the levers of power such that he wasn't allowed to do that, and the democratic outcome of the election was respected. We've had numerous other ways that we've been trying to be very involved in in the fight to defend the rights of working people, and we'll continue to do that. And defending the right to vote during this coming period, trying to do something in terms of getting the ProAct passed, and then of course the whole struggle around climate change, which frankly, Amazon is a big determinant in that fight too.
I agree with you 100%. And what I was getting to, whenever you guys are willing, we're ready to stand in solidarity with y'all, especially on the Amazon side. If I have some inquiries over there in Chicago, which I know there are buildings already organizing,
right?
I would love to have that solidarity. My last question, and then I'll pass it to Blakely if she has questions. What is your slogan for your union, and what does it mean?
Well, we have multiple slogans, but lately what we've been using in terms of branding, if you want to call it that, is the Union for Everyone, which is a nice play on UE. We've gone far beyond United Electrical Workers, which is what the UE stood for originally. Most of the electrical industry is gone from this country, as I mentioned, and we believe in organizing those workers who want to organize on a democratic basis, to have control of their rank and file control of their own union in order to fight militantly and know which side they're on. Them and us unionism is what we talk about. We have a great pamphlet. Anybody who wants to go to our website at ueunion.org. You can find, as you scroll down, the pamphlets available online for scrolling or downloading as a PDF, or you can order a booklet version of it very cheap. But it talks about our principles of what it takes to be a union that practices them and us unionism, what some people call class struggle unionism. You know which side you're on, and you take that into account as you do your fights.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
One of the questions that I have that I was thinking about while you guys were talking was how, if possible, if it is possible to end up passing the ProAct, how do you think that organizers can overcome the onslaught of lobbying and propaganda that is happening right now against it?
Yes, look, we need labor laws changed. We need the way the labor board and the courts and federal administrations interpret labor law change too. We need all of those things. But even when those things are done, we don't win unless workers are willing to organize, band together, stand up, fight back. And we have the capacity to do that even now. I mean, you look at something we did just during the last Great Recession in 2008, the Plant Occupation Republic Windows and Doors. And if you're not familiar with that, please Google it, look it up. There's a video of it on the UE website. But that was a situation where the workers did not have the law on their side. But what they managed to do is they did a fight such that they got the public on their side. And therefore, the government and the corporations couldn't intervene against them. And one of the biggest banks in the world ended up paying out a couple $1 million to those workers that the law said they didn't have to pay. The workers were owed that money, certainly, but the bank could have been protected by bankruptcy laws from paying it. And that didn't happen because the workers stood up and fight and united the community, united the whole country at that point. So those are the kind of fights that we need to have, whether the laws change or not. And that's the only way we'll win. And frankly, the laws are not likely to change unless we have those kind of fights. The original labor laws were passed because workers were already organized and fighting and shutting down major industries, and there were all kinds of battles, and unfortunately very violent battles, with the violence generally carried out, by police forces, et cetera, and private militias hired by companies, as opposed to by the workers. The workers were the victims in the great majority of cases. But those fights and that turmoil is what got the laws passed. Public sector laws. The public sector had no right to organize until public sector workers just started saying, we don't care what the law says, these conditions are abominable, we're going to strike even though legally we can't. And they went to jail for it in many cases, but then the laws changed. So the struggle comes first, the laws come afterwards.
Right. So what you're saying is that it has to be, again, from the ground up. It has to be people fighting and organizing, and eventually the laws will follow that, which kind of brings me to my second question, because I think you're right about that, is that I didn't grow up hearing about unions.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was by the time I was like a kid and growing up, like I didn't know what a union was, never really heard a union, never heard of my parents talk about a union. And by the time I finally first heard of it, when my sister's husband was talking about it, he was like, oh, they're going to take all my money. They want me to pay all these dues. And it was for this like grocery store corporation. And so it kind of, my question kind of is like, what happened to make all that go away when there was a labor struggle? I mean, I guess I kind of know, like, it was like Reagan and a lot of like money and all that. But also, I guess the question kind of is, how do you change and educate people to understand the importance? Because there are a lot of people that are struggling, but they don't know that they can fight back against it. And what does the labor movement as a whole need to do to kind of start educating people and fighting back to try to help people understand that this is even an option for them? Because some people don't know.
Well, the main thing is we need to demonstrate the power of a union. And when that's done, the word spreads. So the perfect example of this is the Chicago Teachers Union, which had fallen into, really bad business unionist practices where they weren't organizing their own members. They weren't leading any fights. They were just taking whatever was getting handed to them, which was generally bad. And a group of members said, enough is enough with that. They got themselves educated, really good folks. They had some of their early meetings actually at UE Hall in Chicago. So we've known them from the beginning, back in the late 2000s, first decade. And they got themselves organized and were able to convince enough of their fellow members that, hey, we need a different approach. And they did it. They took control of the local, and then they led audacious fights. And these were fights that connected with the community also, and they went on big strikes, and they won. And great that they won, but what it did is it inspired teachers all across the country to say, hey, we have the same problems they do. They're dealing with their problems. Why aren't we doing the same, right? Mm-hmm. So you start with that, and then you get that domino effect going from there. And that's exactly what happened in the 30s. Some workers said enough is enough and engaged in a fight, and other workers said we can do that too. So the labor movement needs to demonstrate what we can do, and it just hasn't been done to scale in a very long time. And and that was the intention of, you mentioned Reagan. I would say Reagan just took advantage of what had been built over the previous 30 years since the destruction of the McCarthy era, when the militant unions were largely destroyed and sidelined, and you had business unionism and you had corrupt unionism, frankly, and the labor movement forgot how to fight by and large. And Reagan came along and he just blew the whole house of cards over because there was no fight left in the labor movement anymore. Reagan just took advantage of what had already happened. And so it's up to us to rebuild a militant fighting labor movement, and we do that from the bottom up. Again, I'll go back to EWOC. Part of what they're doing is helping train a whole new generation of folks on how to stand up for themselves and fight for themselves. That's the training that's needed. That's the education that's needed, and they've got a program of workshops that they run for folks where you can learn stuff. They've got a nice little handbook that's got basic steps on how to get yourself and your fellow workers organized at a workplace. And we get enough people trained like that. Folks don't realize in the 1920s, labor was totally flat on its back. It took a terrible defeat just after World War I, when the steel strike fell apart because of lack of industrial unionism. And then there were the Palmer raids, where they were going at, which was kind of an earlier version of the McCarthy era, where they were going after people for being left wingers, a lot of whom were immigrants then as at a later time. And labor looked like it was totally buried. But what happened instead is you had all this labor education going, where people were being trained on how do we fight when the time is right. And the Trade Union Education League was a key part of that. So what's happening now is some of that. People learning by talking to each other, and people learning by trying things and seeing what wins, and seeing what sparks other people to do similar things. So I'm very optimistic because most of the working class now realizes the system isn't working for them, and therefore they're willing to fight to make changes. And that's what creates the grounds for us to rebuild the labor movement, and this time have it be much more grounded in the working class than it has become over the last few decades.
Couldn't have said it better. I agree 100%. Especially after Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
That spark the fuse was Amazon workers, and I think we're continuing here in New York, and that is probably hopefully that'll be the catalyst for this fight as well. And if we're successful here, it can be done anywhere, and that's what we're hoping is going to happen.
That's right. More power to you. You're taking a fight to the belly of the beast, and that's what needs to happen. We just have to recognize, this is not a quick fight with instant victories. We got to be in it for the longer haul. But if we are, we can make a big difference for our families and the families of our kids and those who come thereafter.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to ask you, Carl. Any last minute advice before I let you go? Any last minute advice for us workers over here that's trying to form this independent union, the Amazon Labor Union?
I think it's just the recognition that you need solidarity amongst the workers at the individual workplaces, but we also have to create the bonds of solidarity across multiple workplaces so that we've got the leverage to win the measure of justice that we need to, that we can actually take on these major corporations and win for working people.
Agree. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us. It was an amazing conversation. That was a lot.
Glad to be here, and good luck with your work. It's absolutely essential.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Take care.
Yep. Take care.